Welcome to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. We like to talk to Daniel from time to time to get an update on foreign policy and what the United States is doing. What the United States is really doing, or at least what is not being reported in the mainstream media. And certainly the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity exposes a lot of things that the mainstream media appears not to be all that inclined to expose or to tell us about. So I'm always grateful to have Daniel with me. Thanks for joining me again, Daniel.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks very much. It's good to be with you. If you hear some strange background noise, I'm traveling this week, and I'm up in the Washington, D.C. area, and I tell you, the weather is so beautiful here, I couldn't resist coming out on the patio. So I hope that doesn't interfere with what we're trying to do here.
You sound perfectly well now, and I heard a few dogs barking a little while ago, and I was just thinking maybe they might be some dogs from Samantha Powers or somebody like that, but or some of those other neocons that seem not to be too favorably disposed towards the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. In any event, there is a video that is on the Ron Paul Institute site right now. You and Dr. Paul discussed Syria. It's titled "More Lies Brings More Chaos." Give us an overview of what that's about, what you and Dr. Paul talked about there.
Well, this is we did an episode of the Liberty Report about this general topic, and also I wrote a column, and I guess the column spurred the Liberty Report, and so they're kind of both related, and it has to do with the strange shifting U.S. policy towards Syria, and we may even have talked about this, Jay, because a week and a half or so ago, there was this report in an Israeli newspaper that Russia was preparing to invade Syria. They had thousands of troops. They were going to be landing there. They were going to be building bases, and all of this sort of thing. They're going to invade. And on the basis of this one report that didn't have a single source on record, all of a sudden the story just kind of snowballed in the way that you'd kind of wonder if it wasn't a planted story. But it kind of snowballed and became conventional wisdom that the Russians are coming, and they're coming into Syria in a big way. And, of course, we haven't seen thousands of troops. We haven't seen an invasion. What we may have seen is some sort of an uptick in Russian activity. However, it's hard to know if this hasn't been going on all along, and it's just that the Western media is paying attention, or someone wants them to pay attention. But according to Vladimir Putin this past week, he said, and this is kind of interesting, Jay, and I know you'll appreciate this because this is how propaganda works. Putin gave a talk at some summit they were having there, and he said, of course, we have had very intense and close relations with the Syrian government and assisted the Syrian government. And the Western media cut it off right there and said, he even admitted that he's doing this. But his very next sentence was, we're fulfilling orders that we've had, military orders that we've had 5 or 7 years ago.
Oh, geez.
So they cut that part out.
Yeah, conveniently.
So it's, we're the only ones allowed to sell military stuff. You can't. How dare you sell it to some people that are being, they're having their government overthrown by a bunch of radical jihadists. So,
right.
But this is the basis of this. Even he admits it, which is crazy. And then yesterday, Foreign Policy magazine came out and said they have the proof, they have the satellite photos, and I'm not an expert in satellite photos, and I don't think most other people are, which is why you can very easily fool people. What I saw is a couple of pictures of the ground, and I didn't see anything else on it, but this was supposedly some sort of heightened Russian presence. So this is a long way of saying that the U.S. narrative is changing in Syria, and I think it's partly a product of desperation that the policy has not worked and is not working, and partly a way to perhaps divert attention and say, look, it's all the Russians. And this brings us, I'm sorry, this is a long way of answering your question. This brings us back to what happened this past week with Samantha Power giving an interview to CNN, essentially blaming everything that's happening in Syria, blaming it all on Russia, and warning Russia they better not start helping the Assad government at all. They better not come in and start fighting ISIS, I guess is the long and short of it.
Yeah. Well, who is this? Tell our listeners who Samantha Powers is. What
Oh
is her
yes,
position?
I'm sorry. Yes, she is the U.S. ambassador to the UN,
Okay.
and normally that's not necessarily such a high-profile position, but Samantha Power is very famous for what I call the weaponization of human rights. She is the left interventionist. She is for example, she was one of the strongest voices in favor of the U.S. attacking Libya and giving them a nice, wonderful democracy, and we know how that's worked out. She believes in democracy at the barrel of a gun.
Yeah. It's that was sort of a Marxist idea, wasn't it?
Yeah, and this is
Stalin, Lenin.
yeah, and the neocons use American power and American exceptionalism as their excuse for invasion, and the humanitarian interventions say, oh, we're going to bring them all sorts of nice things, but both of them are successful. But unfortunately, both of them, after the interventions they call for, they leave behind a country in much worse shape than when they started.
Well, certainly, humanitarian is not the result of whatever Samantha Powers is advocating out of Syria. If anything, we're seeing this huge problem now of refugees. I mean, this is really potentially, I would say, revolutionary in a way, because there's massive amounts of people going into Europe at a time when Europe really can't afford it. Perhaps it's very difficult anyway, and it looks like it's tearing Europe apart to a great extent. If I understand, Daniel, a lot of the countries in the Eastern European countries, at least that are part of NATO, are not very happy about Miss Merkel sort of pushing these people over onto their soil.
Well, the Hungarians have been particularly demonized. They're kind of in the front line, as the Schengen agreement puts out. There are no borders within the European Union, but the countries on the periphery, they are responsible. Any refugees that come onto their territory, they're responsible for registering them and processing their claims, and it's an enormous burden. And in normal times, you can handle 30 or 40 at a time coming, but when you're having 3, 4, 5,000 a day pouring in to your border because German Chancellor Merkel said, we'll take them all in Germany, no problem. We'll take everyone. And of course, that is just a signal to these hordes to come marching in. And so it left Hungary in an absolute disastrous situation. They finally had to respond by building a kind of a border barrier to keep these people from coming through. Jay, you and I, when we think of refugees, we think of poor families without shoes and
Yeah.
half starved and this sort of thing. But if you look at the video, these are 70. I saw statistics. 75% of these people are men, and they're men of healthy fighting age.
Wow.
So this is, and I was astonished. I was looking at some video with a friend of mine this morning, and these refugees are attacking the Hungarian police. They're throwing concrete at them. They're throwing rocks.
Oh.
It's all there on the video. But
Wow.
the Western media is not reporting it this way. The Western media is reporting that the Hungarians are gassing these people. They're spraying them with tear gas, and yeah, they are using crowd control devices because these guys are attacking the police with concrete blocks and rocks. It's just unbelievable what's happening to these countries. And so now it's all shifted toward Serbia and Croatia now. And I mean, there has been a war of words between Hungary and Croatia, and now between Serbia and Croatia. And just before we started talking, Jay, I noticed in the news that the Hungarians have seized a Croatian train in Hungarian territory with 1,000 of these migrants on it, trying to break their way into Hungary.
Oh.
So I mean,
Wow.
this is actually turned into a pre-war situation, I think. And I don't want to overstate things, but I've watched the war of words between these countries, and they're all furious with Germany. Merkel said the stupidest thing in the world: you can all come to Germany, no problem. And then when they started pouring in, she had a panic attack because her polling numbers went into the toilet.
Yeah.
And so she said, "Oh my God, we've got to stop this." And so Germany and Austria now, who all last week were being praised for how generous they are now desperately trying to close their borders. And this, it's just like your plumbing. That's going to leave a clog in the pipe way down. And I'm telling you, Jay, this is an explosive situation. This is going to lead to regime change. I think it's going to lead to some sort of a war.
No, I heard somebody the other day actually commenting that it could break up the European Union. This could be the thing that really causes, tremendous strains within the European Union in any event. And if it's really destroying Miss Merkel like it is politically, wow, it's
Well, there's a
yeah.
silver lining there then.
You mentioned the news media wants to blame the Hungarians for this thing, but of course they also want to blame Assad, right?
Oh,
Assad
sure.
is the reason for all of it. Assad and Putin are the reasons. It wouldn't have anything to do with us.
Exactly. It's as if our support for radical jihadists who've turned the country of Syria into a hellhole is absolutely beside the point. It's not even a relevant factor.
Right.
As a matter of fact,
How dare Assad have the right to protect himself? How dare he get help from Putin to defend his own country?
exactly. And, going back to the Samantha Power thing we were talking about, not only did she focus on Assad being responsible for all this, she actually downplayed ISIS. She said, even if you were a Machiavellian and all you cared about was ISIS, to support a regime like this, i.e., Assad's, and not take into account the views of the Syrian people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So she's saying that all the Syrian people are against Assad, and only a Machiavellian is obsessed with ISIS. Well, weren't we just told couple of months ago that ISIS was the greatest threat in the history of the world?
Yeah. Except now maybe we're using ISIS to destabilize things in order for, I don't know, who knows what. I've never been able to make sense of this whole Middle East regime thing, regime changes that have been seemingly what it's all about. I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, although I was talking to Richard Mayberry earlier today, and he had some interesting theories about how Turkey sort of fits into this whole scheme. And anyway, who knows which way it's going to go? But maybe any more thoughts on the Middle East before we switch to? You had another interesting topic in Ecuador, but anything else you'd like to add about the Middle East before we switch?
Well, I would just say, I've not been able to really verify this. It's always very tricky. But I have some friends in the Hungarian media, and they have interviewed some of these rebels who have said that they've been paid to come over here,
Oh,
paid by the thousands to come over here.
wow.
And if you want to have some sort of a regime change op, say an NED type of thing, and you flood the country with tens of thousands of migrants, you can really do some damage. And as I say, this is just what people are saying. These are press reports that have been coming out in Hungary and places like that. So, is it true? I don't know, but it's certainly very, very concerning.
Mm. Yeah, it's confusing to me. It doesn't make sense, but then a lot of things don't make sense, and later on maybe we'll understand what's going on. But in any event, switching continents, you mentioned Ecuador. There's some story in Ecuador you wanted to tell our listeners about.
Yeah, we ran an interesting article written by fellow Timothy Alexander Guzman, and it's just, I guess it's because of one of my favorite topics, but here's a classic situation. They're having an election in Ecuador next year. The current president, Correa, is absolutely hated by the U.S.
Oh yeah.
He's close to the leftish people down in Latin America, the
Mm-hmm.
Venezuelans and such,
Mm-hmm.
and the U.S. has been determined to remove him from power because he's not kowtowing to the U.S. line. And I just thought I wanted to bring it up to you real quickly. There's elections next year. This fellow's writing that he sees a lot of U.S. Action toward regime change. They've been in real contact with a lot of the opposition. This NGO, Fundamedios, came out with reports saying that the media in Ecuador is totally unfree, it's totally biased, and all of these sorts of things. And then when you scratch below the surface, you see that this organization is funded by the USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy, as well as Freedom House, which is a pseudo, it's not even a private, it's 97% funded by the government, so it's another government, a government arm of regime change. So I guess this would go more toward our what to look out for column, Jay, that
Mm-hmm.
It looks like U.S. is cranking up the machine against Ecuador, and it's where it turns out, we don't know, but we got elections there next year, and I think U.S. is setting the stage.
Well, that's very interesting. I should talk to my friend John Perkins about that because I believe he's quite close to the government down there and other people to get his ideas about what might be going on there. As a matter
Definitely.
of fact, what would be fun sometime, Dan, it would be to have you on with John Perkins on my show because I think you two would have an awful lot to talk about.
I have
Uh,
huge respect for him. He's a terrific person, and his book was just a magnificent book.
we he may not agree on the economic side of things as much, but even there, when I've had chats with John Perkins, he's not anti-capitalist. He just thinks that I think he's looking at some of the abuses. What I wouldn't even call it capitalism, it's more fascism, where governments and corporations are in bed together, perhaps to finance NGOs that overthrow governments. Not unheard of. It's something certainly it's been well documented through our history. So who
Sure.
knows? Well, that is certainly something we want to watch out for and look forward to. I'm sure when things start to happen, there will be something on the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. I would just tell my listeners, go there frequently, go there every day and see what's there because every day there's new things up there that you're never going to see on the mainstream media because it's not everything isn't exactly the way you're told. Although, as you say, Daniel, people hear it often enough they start to believe it's true, right?
Yeah, that's how propaganda works.
Yeah.
You put out something that's unsourced, you get enough of the mainstream media to repeat it, and then it becomes conventional wisdom.
Yeah, if CNBC, if NBC, ABC, all the mainstream media is saying it 3 or 4 times, you start to say, well, sure, of course, those are the truth tellers of our country, and they only tell us the truth. But in any event, we need to be ever vigilant, as Thomas Jefferson said, and to try to understand what really is going on. I want to thank you again, Daniel, for coming on to the show, and we'll look to talk to you again very soon.
Thank you very much, Jay.